Okay, folks, here we go. Good evening. I'd like to call to order the February 17th, 2016 meeting of the Northfield Township Planning Commission. If you could please join us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
With the absence of our secretary, I'm going to call on Ms. Chick to call the roll, please.
Mr. Roman? Here. Mr. Cousineau?
Here.
Ms. Chalkley? Here. Mr. Dignan?
Present.
Ms. Chick here. Mr. Iaquinto?
Here.
We do have a quorum. Next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Does anyone have any questions about the agenda or any additions?
Make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Support.
Motion by Iaquinto, supported by Chick. Any questions on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Next item is called to the public. If there's anyone from the public that would like to speak, you may do so now. Okay. Seeing no one. Next item is correspondence. There were correspondence in the packet that you received. Does anyone have any questions, concerns, comments? Hearing none. Moving on, reports. Board of Trustees report. Ms. Chick?
Board of Trustees met on February 9th. The board passed a resolution 6-1 approving the 5-year Parks and Recreation Master Plan. A lease agreement contract with Verizon was approved for the terms of erecting a cell tower at Fire Station Number 2 on North Territorial. A second motion was passed that would distribute the revenue from the cell tower lease at a split of 75-25, with 75% going to the fire department and 25% going to the general fund, should the cell tower receive final approval. And the Whitmore Lake SAD construction bid was approved, and the purchase of 5 grinder pumps for the Whitmore Lakes Special Assessment District was also approved. That's all.
Thank you, Mrs. Chick. Does anyone have any questions on the Board of Trustees report? Hearing none, the Zoning Board report. Ms. Chalkley.
We met last night, and Mr. Nowatzki came in looking for some variances for his property, and one was approved and all the rest were denied.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Question?
Which variance was approved?
The one that was approved was the ones where he could have marathon across the, in multiple locations across the canopies.
Mirrors? I'm sorry, what did you say?
The canopies.
Oh, it's the signage. Okay, thank you.
Signage, yes,
Thank
and
you.
that was the only one that was approved.
Okay. Any other questions for Ms. Chalkley? Moving on, staff report. Anything?
Nothing, sir.
All right, thank you. And planning consultant report.
Only to introduce myself, I'm Sally Hodges. I'm McKenna's planning representative, and I look forward to working with you for a long, long time. I have a master's in urban planning from the University of Arizona.
Ms. Hodges, can
Is
you
that
move
better?
it?
It
I mean,
has to
you
be
have
very
to be
close.
right on it.
Oh.
Like this.
Is that better? Even better. Okay. I'll repeat a little bit then. I have my master's in urban planning from the University of Arizona and over 20 years of experience in a variety of townships and communities in southeast Michigan primarily. So I look forward to learning about Northfield Township and working with all of you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Welcome. Okay, moving on. Public hearings, which we have none tonight. Number 9, old business. The first item under old business is Lake Overlay Zone. Consider the recommendations from Beckett and Raeder regarding ways to reduce nonconformities on lakefront parcels. I don't know if we want to go to Ms. Hodges. Do you have something to add on that? I know you've reviewed it.
I've taken a look at the recommendations that Leah sent over a week or so ago. You have a copy of her report. In essence, what it appears that Beckett and Raeder has done is analyzed existing conditions on the lots that surround the various lakes, both the built condition and undeveloped lots, And they've made a recommendation to you to make several changes or create an overlay district that would incorporate a number of changes to the regulations that apply on those lots, primarily with the goal of reducing non-conforming situations by creating a way that they would then become a permitted situation. And she is recommending that actually 2 overlay districts be created, one that would cover Whitmore Lake and Wildwood Lakes. It would replace the yard and setback requirements of the underlying district with the following regulations, and I'm on her page 4 of 5 if you want to follow along. She's recommending that the street yards, the front yards, be not less than 10 feet. That the side yards be not less than 10 feet, except when it's the lot is non-conforming in width. That is, it's narrower than it would have to be under the ordinance. And in that case, she's recommending that the shallowest side yard be measured at be required to be 12% of the total width of the lot, and the sum of the 2 side yards would not be less than 30% of the lot width. And then on the waterfront side, that the setback be a minimum of 25 feet. On Horseshoe Lake, she's recommending an overlay district that would be the same as the Whitmore Lake district, except that there would be no minimum front yard on the street side. And that was in consideration of the slow speed of the traffic, the limited traffic that goes around Horseshoe Lake. We have a couple of thoughts about that. I don't know, Mr. Chairman, if you'd like the commission to weigh in or if you'd like me to just share what my thoughts are.
I think we'd like you to continue. Does anyone
Okay.
else have objections?
Okay.
No?
Of course, it's difficult not being part of the entire process, but on the surface and having looked at it, on the street side, when you look at the way the houses are developed and how the area between the house and the street is used, in many of these cases, there's a lot of pavement and it's where the cars park. On a narrower lot, there's not usually room to have a side driveway and there's also slope to pull cars off the road. So, I'd suggest before moving forward on something like this that you consider the needs for parking in these areas, that 10 feet may not be enough for cars to pull off the road and safely back out onto East Shore Drive, for example. Certainly the concept of reducing that setback as much as possible, I think, does contribute towards what she was trying to achieve, which was to give property owners room to expand towards the front rather than going towards the lake in every case. But in my experience on lakefront lots, 10 feet may not be enough, at least on those more heavily traveled roads. Regarding the sliding side yard setback that she's proposed, the minimum of 10 feet is it's the same as the side yard setback is today in the SR2 district. In the SR1, a total of 25 is required for the 2 sides, so that's, if both sides comply, that's a 10 and a 15. So in that regard, it's fairly consistent with what's permitted today. By creating the sliding side yard setback on lots that are narrower than required, you're setting up a situation where there could be some proportional compliance and allowing it. I'd suggest, though, you might consider 15% for the least one instead of 12, because the math is going to be easier, and think about folks in the field and trying to interpret it, and that would be, as it is in the SR2, the 2 sides would be equal. Also, there was a letter in your packet from the building official, and he pointed out that the building code includes some restrictions when houses get close together. In my experience, the building code has a setback of 5 feet, and when you get closer to the lot line than that, there starts to be fire code and firewall requirements that people are often unaware of when they start into a building project and increases costs, and it's not an expected expense. So if you were to go this way, you might have a side yard setback of not less than 10, allow sliding in between, but cap it at 5 as the closest they could be. And if it's at 5, then the relief is the Zoning Board of Appeals, which lets the neighbors know and everybody can weigh in, so there's public notice. So it's a little bit of what's recommended and a little bit of change. Regarding the waterfront rear yard, the 25-foot number that she recommends comes from the natural features section of the ordinance. The SR1 and SR2 have a 20-foot rear yard right now. It's not clear to me from this report whether she was saying, look, you've got waterfront yard setbacks of 25 feet every place else, let's enforce it on SR1, SR2. And she said that changing it from 20 to 25 was not going to create many additional nonconformities, but it's not clear to me whether she was measuring from the building or including decks and things that are, in my experience, often the subject of variances and requests for increasing living area toward the lake. I'm not familiar enough with Whitmore Lake tonight to know if that's a factor, but that particular one we might want to have some additional discussion on. So, again, these are preliminary thoughts based, again, on my understanding of what was recommended and some other situations. So, I'd be happy to talk.
Sure. Mr. Iquinto.
You bring up a very good point regarding the rear yard of 25 feet. Should we have to be specific to state that that is from the point of the dwelling, or that decks are typically included or not included in that?
So by the ordinance, any structure that's attached to the building is supposed to meet the same setbacks as the main building. So if it's an attached deck, unless it's been interpreted differently here, my experience is if it's an attached deck, it needs to meet the principal building setbacks. I was not able to find any special exception for a deck or consideration. In some places, they will define that it's not considered a structure unless it's more than 8 inches above the ground, or other criteria. But again, I don't know for sure, except that the ordinance says that if it's attached and it's a structure, it has to meet the principal building setbacks.
So if it's a non-attached deck, as there are a lot of decks that are not, that are
Okay.
freestanding,
Mm-hmm.
does that then therefore not fall into that criteria? And what I'm asking then,
Sure.
should we be very much more specific within this in stating all of that?
My recommendation would be we should look more closely at some of those situations. My memory is from looking at it this afternoon that there is a lesser setback allowed for a detached accessory structure. So a detached deck could go closer, unless this specifically stated otherwise. If this says no structures at all in it, as the natural features section does, then that has an impact on what you can put there. So it's never simple on the lake, never.
Okay. Ms. Chick?
Excuse me. Yeah, my consideration, or my concern actually, has always been the side yard setbacks, and I'm comfortable with the sliding scale, with the exception that I feel personally there should be a minimum for safety reasons, and I'd like to see that in here if we're going to consider this.
Thank you. Yes. Mr. Hockley?
Yeah, I was concerned about the 25 feet to the water, for the protection of the water.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also concerned about paving, the impervious surface around there, wondering how that might impact the water also. A deck, I don't know that I'm concerned about that, so much, because it's not, the water can run underneath it. That's not so much of a concern for me. So I guess I would like all of this clarified too, like everyone else has been stating. I think that would be helpful to us at this point. As long as we're doing it, we might as well do it well.
Right. Yes, Mr. Roman.
In looking at Kurt Weiland's letter dated the 26th, apparently his first concern was that it sounds like, and it says in his first sentence, number one, it sounds like we are dealing with lakefront properties only and not what I call the cottage district in general. So in this district, obviously it's going to include the homes that are not only lakeside. It's going to continue in. It'd be like basically on the other side of the road also. So that it looks to me like Kurt's main concern wasn't so much the existing homes around the lake, but rather the neighborhood surrounding the lake. That's my interpretation. So all the things that were listed on the overlay consideration, the revised one from Beckett and Raeder, basically spoke to lakeside lots. So I'm wondering, in considering those other homes that are going to be within this district, what kind of nonconformities we're going to be looking at. Probably more so than what's around the lake. That's my guess. But as far as what I heard tonight regarding the 5 minimum and the setback up to 15%, I'm very much like that. It gives a good leeway for a lot of lots that are different sizes and workable space. So that's my opinion at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Roman. Yes, Ms. Chick.
I have a question. I think it's probably been addressed before, but I don't remember the answer. How do we determine where the water line for the lake is, if it rises and falls?
Ms. Hodges?
Is there an established normal high water mark?
There is a legal high limit
Okay.
at a point on the lake, and it's on the southern end of the lake, and it's measured in inch increments.
So that's what we would use.
Yeah.
I can add that to my list of things to look into.
Okay,
Mhm.
all right.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay, I have, yes, Mr. Iaquinto.
In regarding the side yards setback, in her recommendation on page 4, it says not less than 10. Is that 10 combined or 10 per side? Because it's not specific there either, so it's open to interpretation. So it should be specified in how we feel. And in Mr. Weiland's report, it does mention that the minimum setback for the building code is 5 feet, and I would imagine that's 5 feet per side there. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Chair?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
thank you. Just if I may add, Sam, minimum setback on a side yard is 5 feet. You can go to a 0 lot line setback on the side, but you, as Sally indicated previously, you have to build a different type of wall, and so the costs increase significantly.
For the folks at home, that was Mr. Fink. Anyone else? I do have a couple things. I want to bring back to the origins of where this came from. This came out of a request from the Zoning Board of Appeals in regards to lakefront lots that had continuously come before the Zoning Board of Appeals over the course of about 3 years. You know, what's interesting is during that time on the ZBA I had served, we did not, as a matter of fact, I can tell you in the last 10 years, I don't recall seeing a ZBA request. I'll make one exception, but it was an after the fact, in the summer home subdivision, which would be kind of referred to as the cottage, one of the cottage districts, probably the primary cottage district in the township. We did not see one request come before there. I think it's a very different element than what we're looking at here. I like the recommendation from the planner that when we look at this sliding scale, we also leave open the opportunity while we're trying to mitigate how many times these folks have to come to the ZBA in order to improve their homes. Again, if there is a catastrophe and someone loses a home and has to rebuild, they may not fit especially on Main Street, they may not fit with that sliding scale and they may need a variance, but they can still go and ask for a variance. So, as we look at the front street setback, certainly the 10 feet could impose a problem if there is not side yard parking or adjacent parking. As we know, we have some very odd lots that sometimes do carry across the street that are different. But it also sounds to me like, I'll stop there. Mr. Roman?
10 feet does permit you a parallel park,
Yeah,
not a head-in park.
Yeah.
sure.
So, it's,
Okay.
I mean, it's something to consider. It's better than nothing. I mean, at least the car could fit sideways. I think typically it's 10 foot on a parking lot
I think
space.
we have a couple of those along East Shore. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, if I
yes,
could, I did see
please.
some of those on the aerial photo. I guess in looking at it on the aerial, when you get into some of those areas, when you get the houses very close together and close to the road, I also start to have some concern about visibility. Ultimately, it's up to you. You live it, but that's something that I would point out.
Certainly. Mr. Fink?
The
Yes.
only thing that I would add is to potentially take a look at the Wildwood Lake sub as potentially not part of this analysis. The Wildwood Lake sub it's a plotted sort of traditional style suburban subdivision, and I believe all those setbacks are in conformity. It's not the same as I know it's one of our lakes, but it's not the same as Horseshoe or Whitmore.
Thank you, Mr. Fink. I would agree with that and concur. I mean, it sounds to me like where we're at, and the board can tell me otherwise, that we're going to look to Ms. Hodges to kind of more thoroughly review and address the items that not only you raised, but that we raised here, and come back to us. This is something that's existed for a long time. We want to make sure we get it as correct as we possibly can. So, does anyone else have anything on this item for Ms. Hodges or for myself? No? Okay. Ms. Hodges, would you like us to, a motion for that, or are you okay? We can direct a motion if you'd like.
I leave it to your pleasure. I'm fine either way.
Okay, I think we're okay with it, and we'll go from there. All right, let's move on to item B. Before we get into item B, there have been some changes in circumstances, and I want to raise those prior to the discussion on item B, and that is on Sunday, this past Sunday, Living Water Lutheran Church that had brought forth this request. There were some substantial organizational changes, staff changes, and motions. That the church has become an independent church of an LCMS independent church, but in the course of the business that took place there, I can no longer participate in the discussion on this particular item due to the fact that I was involved in the motion necessary to purchase the building that is on the said property. So therefore, I'm going to recuse myself from discussion and voting on this issue. And I believe Mr. Iquento has something to address.
Again, due to the same situations, I am now, as of Sunday, an officer of our Living Water Church, so I will recuse myself from discussion and voting.
Okay, with that being said, we can go on to discussion on item B. And Ms. Chick.
Just ask, so are you an officer as well? Is that why you're?
I am not an
you're
officer,
you
but
are-
I was involved in the motion to purchase the building.
Okay.
And because of and as well as my wife was involved in that same motion. So in light of public interest, I'm going to recuse myself. So, okay, absolutely. I'm going to... Yep, that's okay. If Ms. Chick wouldn't mind, I'd like to, at this point in time, for this discussion item, ask if you don't mind to lead the discussion and take comments and questions, and if there's action, call the action. So, okay, thank you.
So we are on to item B, which is consider the addition of churches as a conditional use in the general commercial district. And Ms. Hodge, would you like to speak to this issue, please?
Certainly. I have to remember to speak close to the mic, so remind me if I move back too much. We've given the Planning Commission our initial report and findings on the 3 questions that you directed us to look at the last meeting. Those questions were, should churches be permitted uses in the general commercial zoning district? Secondly, should the site under discussion be rezoned to one of the Whitmore Lake downtown districts as illustrated in the Township Master Plan? And 3, if rezoning to WLD is considered, what should the boundaries be? So we've taken a look at those 3 questions. Regarding the first question, should the churches be permitted uses in the general commercial zoning district? You just heard some comments at the last meeting. This question of permission of churches and exercise of religious freedom is addressed in the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, which is known as RLUIPA. And I've given you some citations from that act, but in a nutshell, as Phil McKenna described for you, RLUIPA doesn't exempt religious uses from local zoning regulations, nor does it restrict a community from placing conditions on its approval of religious uses, provided that those conditions are applied uniformly for all similar uses. So in the context of zoning and land use impacts, we recommend that you look at your ordinance and identify where similar uses are permitted, and that church uses also be considered in those same areas, subject to those same conditions. The things that come up as most similar to church uses are usually things like assembly halls. And in our analysis, we included places where people would gather and come pretty much at the same time and leave pretty much at the same time in slugs of traffic, to coin a phrase. Things like auditoriums, movie theaters, assembly halls, reception halls, dance halls, schools because of auditoriums, meeting facilities, and so on. So we went through the zoning districts in the book and took a look at, 1, whether church uses were permitted, and 2, whether there were other uses in those districts that were similar in characteristics. And I've included those in a table on page 2 of our report. First, in the agricultural district, you permit churches already as a conditional use, and there are also other uses that are similar that are permitted as conditional uses. In the low-density residential, churches are permitted as conditional uses, and there are other similar uses there. In the multiple family residential, same thing. Churches are permitted. There are other uses that are conditional. In the mobile home park, also permits churches and permits other uses that are similar. In SR1, you already permit churches as a conditional use, and there are other similar uses. In the SR2 district, churches are not permitted, but we also did not see any similar uses permitted in that district on the list. So in that case, the decision is always up to the township as to whether that's an appropriate place, but you don't have the burden of RLUIPA hanging over you in that case. When we get to the commercial districts, it does change. The local commercial district currently doesn't list religious institutions or churches as a permitted use, but subject to conditional approval, you have secondary schools, which often have assemblies of people that could be considered similar. So that's a district where we'd suggest you consider whether you want to allow religious uses. In the highway commercial district, it's the same as the local commercial district. You don't permit churches currently, but dance halls and places of amusement are permitted, subject to conditions. In the general commercial district, churches aren't permitted, and other uses that are similar to are permitted, and in particular, in the general commercial district, indoor theaters are permitted as a use of right, which in my mind, gives you a couple of choices. You could choose to make theaters a use subject to conditions, which could be a reasonable thing to do given the nature of the use and the traffic and the things that you're concerned with churches, and then also add churches to the list. Or you could permit churches as a use by right, but I'd recommend you consider adding them in the general commercial district as a use. The RO zoning district already permits churches. The limited industrial and general industrial districts do not, and they don't have uses that we considered similar. In research, technology, and manufacturing, you've recently added churches as a use subject to conditions, and we did not see any reason to change that. The enterprise service district and the planned shopping center district both do not list churches today, and they both permit theaters by right. So that's the same situation as general commercial, where you should consider which way you want to go. And then going on down the list, recreation conservation does not, and there weren't similar uses. And in the downtown district, churches are, and many similar uses are permitted subject to conditions. So that's, that's the situation on your existing districts. You have churches permitted in 8 of the zoning districts, and there are 5 of those where we'd recommend that you take a deeper look and consider whether churches should be added in those districts either by right or subject to conditions. Should the site under discussion be rezoned to one of the downtown districts as illustrated on the township master plan? We've given you a close-up of the master plan. The entire area is shown as the Village Commercial District all the way to the freeway. The Whitmore Lake District, with its 3 sub-districts, was created to address that Village Center master plan. So at the most basic level, it could be reasonable to consider rezoning the property to a WLD category. The question would be, and I think it merits additional discussion, is which of the sub-districts is most appropriate. I narrowed it down and kicked out the waterfront district right off the bat. That was simple, but when you're going between the neighborhood and the downtown sub-district, it becomes something that I would defer to the Planning Commission, because you all have been involved in creating the master plan and understand it at this point better than we do, and I'd be happy to help. If the properties were to be rezoned to the Whitmore Lake District, there obviously will be new conditions and requirements placed on the Saddlery property and the other properties, any other properties that you'd choose to rezone. For example, the town district doesn't require off-street parking. Usually that's in consideration of other parking being available, the easiness of walking, and so on. The general commercial district does require parking, and depending on the location, you may want some off-street parking with a church use in this location. Again, that's something to consider. The dimensional requirements would change. If you were to take it to the neighborhood district, it could go as high as, the building could go as high as 55 feet. The other main difference that we saw was in the Whitmore Lake districts, the building would be closer to the road if added onto or if rebuilt. There's specific design and site criteria in the Whitmore Lake districts, but design criteria compliance is only required to be met for new buildings or when an existing building expands by more than 500 square feet or 5% of the total floor area. So in consideration of a built site, and if it were just to be moved into with site changes made, the design criteria probably would not come into play. And it would simply be non-conforming in that regard. So our thought is that rezoning the site to WLD would promote implementation of the master plan, and it would allow the church to make application and be considered for approval as a conditional use. If the owners of the site are in agreement, we see few drawbacks to this approach if there's an agreement on an appropriate sub-district. And finally, the third question, what should the boundaries be? We took a look at what was shown on the zoning map that we had as the entirety of the GC district in this area and identified 5 sites. The whole area is also master planned VC. And so what would be considered in looking, what we considered in looking at the boundaries are the existing uses, whether the use would be permitted under the new zoning or not, and whether it would make sense from that regard, whether you'd be creating non-conforming uses. It's my understanding that a couple of years ago, the library, site number 5, was zoned to WLD downtown. And so that one would be taken out of consideration already, if it's already properly zoned. And then that, of course, that use is permitted in that district. The Lakeside Saddlery property, that is the site of the potential church, the saddlery is permitted in the GC, and the potential church would not be. Both uses would be permitted in the Whitmore Lake District. And if rezoned to WLD, it would conform. The archery center would be permitted. It's permitted now, and it would be a permitted use if rezoned. The properties across the street, we admittedly had trouble identifying what the uses were on them. The site that's closest to the freeway appears to be for sale, and it looks like some of the windows are boarded up and there's storage on it. There seemed to be some residential use there, but you all know better than I probably what the use is on the site and whether it would be a permitted use. And similarly, the vehicle repair and maintenance facility next to the railroad tracks, that would not be a permitted use, I believe, in the downtown district as it stands. I did make a comment, though, in your considerations. Rezoning is if it's a township-initiated rezoning, or even if the applicant applies, it's a mixed bag. There's pros and there's cons. It's not always a bad thing to rezone a parcel to something that's not the existing use. The interests of the property owner need to be taken into account. That's simply the way most communities do business. But a rezoning could be an opportunity for a site to redevelop consistent with the master plan. So it could promote economic development. And that's a decision that should be made through the public process and planning considerations and discussions and talking with the owners and so on. So in looking at the information that we had, we believe that sites 1, 2, and of course 5 are most consistent with WLD right now, but I'd suggest you take a deeper look at it if you want to go further. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I'm sure there are some.
Does any of the commissioners have any questions or comments? Mr. Roman?
I have both. Through the chair to Ms. Hodges. If there are no assembly uses in a zoning district, either permitted or as a conditional use, does our LUPA still apply?
The community is permitted to zone, and the churches need to follow the zoning. So in my experience, that is, you're on much firmer ground than you are if it's clearly in contrast with an assembly use, that if assembly uses are being treated differently than churches. So I'm not saying it absolutely could not come into play. I'm not an attorney, but in my experience, the thing that you most need to be aware of is not treating churches different than other uses that are similar.
Okay. Madam Chair, at this time, Madam Chair, my thought on this whole thing, and it really gets very complex if you consider it all at one time. Mm-hmm. But I think what realistically, and I'm open to hear what other commissioners' opinions are. But I think if we break this down into two separate things, being one, look at our consistency in all the zonings regarding our LUPA Act. I think that needs to be done overall through several of the zonings. And whether it be that places of worship are added, or if, from what I'm hearing from my question, if some assembly uses are removed, then those won't have to be added. So I really would like, to see us go through the zoning districts in question and really look at what we have. And then my thought is the second thing would be to look at the lakeside or the Saddlery property regarding living waters, and specifically look at their case and what we may want to do in that case. I don't, like I said, it's very complex if you look at doing all of it at one time. But I did have a comment regarding McKenna's report. When I looked in the ES, which is Enterprise Service District, I did not see commercial recreation facilities, including outdoor theaters, bowling alleys, skating rinks, racket clubs. And that's specifically Article 20, Section 36-563, and Article 20, 36-564, although I might be mistaken. But in that case, whether or not you do include that one, and I'm not sure it should be, based on what the permitted uses and conditional uses are, I think we're looking at LC, HC, GC zoning districts, along with planned shopping center. So basically 4, possibly 5, if you wanted to look at the RTM district again. But I mean, that was gone through not in the not so recent past.
Right.
But what I would like to see is consistency on our part for the township and the ordinance throughout the whole thing. And once we have that down, continue on from there. I was very pleased to, I did a lot of research regarding our LUPA thing, for a good read if somebody's interested, or my fellow commissioners. I was looking at justice.gov, and there was a report on the 10th anniversary, which would have been 2010. And it cited some cases, some specific cases. And really, if you're looking at the living water case as compared to what, some prior things have been, there was a case, the United States versus Waukegan, Illinois, and it was basically the same exact circumstance, whereas if there were uses of theaters and other meeting things, and a place of worship was excluded, and of course it was ruled against the city or township. So that's what I have at this point. I'd like to hear from other commissioners, though. Thank you.
Anybody else has something they want to add to this? Any commissioners? Yeah, Mr. Shockley?
Yeah, I think we should clean up our zoning ordinance and add that in where appropriate, and, perhaps look at the RTMs. When I'm seeing no, we don't have any other similar uses, yes, we added the churches to the RTM. Maybe that's still appropriate, but, we did that some time ago. But we should be consistent, and I have to agree with Mr. Roman about that. So that is one thing we can do. The other thing is I do like looking at matching the zoning up there with the master plan. And so taking a look at, changing some of that zoning to the Whitmore Lake districts, whichever one is appropriate. I think that's a good thing to do. I think it would open up a lot more opportunities for the landowners of those few properties up there to be able to do some more things than they could have done as just a GC up there. So I think we ought to take a look at that.
Anybody else? Go ahead, Mr. Roman.
Kind of a response to that. In looking at what we have as far as the future zoning being village or a VC or Whitmore Lake District. I see it could also be quite a hindrance on the property owners, including the possible new owner of the saddlery, because it's a whole different application of setbacks and look, and there's a lot of new requirements in the Whitmore Lake District that may not suit an existing non-conforming building that they would have. So I think the petitioner really ought to look close at what they would want to do. And I'm not so certain I would want to throw Van's Archery and whoever owns that and the residential and the commercial property on the other side of the street into a zoning situation where it's burdensome for them. Even though it is for sale, it's quite a change compared to general commercial. So I do have other questions regarding some specifics, such as like hypotheticals. I don't know if you want to entertain that right now in discussion of this, and I think Ms. Hodges could really, shed some light for me on the questions that I have, but I don't know if you're prepared to delve into all that right
I
yet.
think since we have Ms. Hodges here, if we have any questions, we could probably address those to her. Can I just make one comment, though? I don't everything that you've said, I totally agree with. I think it's interesting when something comes before the Planning Commission that it opens up the whole different areas, and so those are things that we have to look at. So I agree that we need to take this one project or one issue at a time, and so and I also looked into the RLUPA Act back a few months ago, and you have to be very careful, but if the township has legs to stand on, then we should go forward. So go ahead, Mr. Roman, with your questions to Ms. Hodge.
Okay, thank you. I did see, in looking overall on our other articles of the ordinance, and I'm going to use it as a hypothetical. So let's say Living Water purchases this property and wishes to change it to the Whitmore Lake District. In the Whitmore Lake District, in Article, let me see here, Article 24, and it's 36-710 F1, and what that is referring to is controlled uses. In there's language that is very specific and quite restrictive, depending on which interest you have. It basically says it shall be unlawful to hereafter establish any controlled use if the controlled use will be within 1,000 feet radius of any church. And later on at the end of that, it says no waivers shall be given to permit a controlled use to locate within 1,000-foot radius of any church, nursery, primary or secondary school, daycare facility, or public park. And if you were to look at our Whitmore Lake District, it's not very large. 1,000 feet is quite a distance when you're looking at that zoning district. So my question is, if it were to go that way, there would be 1,000 feet, which all the controlled uses could not be even permitted by our current language. So my thought is that needs to be looked at somehow. I think it's excessive. Even if you consider it being like a park situation, and with park situation with a drinking establishment, which is I think one of the controlled uses. It makes me think of like Plymouth, the Box Bar sitting right across the street from Plymouth Park. To me, I don't have an issue with that, But, I mean, somebody may have, but I think we also need to look at that. So my question, I guess, to Sarah is, or Sally rather, is if that zoning district, if the church was to rezone, and we'd have to somehow look at a 1,000-foot radius of that entire property, because I think that's what it specifies. Excuse me. If it were to not be in the Whitmore Lake District, then could still a controlled use be on the other side of the tracks, which is a different zoning district?
I haven't reviewed this section of the
No,
ordinance. How it relates to the building.
right. And I don't
I'd be
mean,
happy to do that.
thank you, I don't mean to put you on a spot,
Sure.
but this particular one, I mean, it can get very involved with a lot of language that we have existing in some ordinances here.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Sorry,
Um,
Mr. Fink.
I guess the other thing that I would look at is, you know, I certainly wasn't around when the Whitmore Lake downtown and waterfront districts were created, but I sort of often go back to sort of what the built environment looks like, you know, what the design is and what the form is. And I imagine the Whitmore Lake Downtown District in general, or the Village Center District in general, is a sort of downtown kind of district where we're looking at buildings to the street line, we're looking at, you know, encouraging walkability in small downtown environments, you know, the city of Brighton, for example, their little Main Street downtown, you know, those kind of things are, I imagine, and certainly in reading the documentation and the master plan and the districts itself, those were the purposes of the Whitmore Lake District. I'm not saying one way or another, but I guess I would ask myself the question: is the salary, does it conform and fit with that sort of design criteria, that form-based sort of built environment? And I'm not sure that, just as somebody sitting here today, I'm not sure that I see that as a building and a site that can sort of conforms in that design way. And as a planner, I often think about, you know, I often personally think about design, site design and form as really important. So that's my 2 cents. So I would sort of agree with Larry that, you know, looking at that use in that particular district needs to be really thought out carefully. And I think that in addition to what Larry said, in addition to the 1,000-foot radius, there are restrictions on that district to create that form. And so I think you might be inadvertently putting a burden on living water by trying to fit, you know, a round peg into a square box, because it just, I'm not sure that it fits that form. Those are just my thoughts.
Did you have more comments? No?
I agree, as well said. That's
Okay.
kind of pretty much where I was headed to, probably with more detail than you wanted.
Ms. Chalkley?
Yeah, so I have a question related to that. So how does an existing building, okay, so it's non-conforming now, when it goes into, you know, if it's rezoned into the other district, what's kind of the future like for that building? How are the current owners then strapped as far as what they can do or can't do with their building? I mean, is it really how much of a burden is it, and maybe there are adjustments that can be made?
You know, I did note that there's a section, or there's a statement in the ordinance that says the existing non-conforming buildings don't have to comply with all the requirements of the design criteria, except when they're changing, when they're expanding by more than 500 square feet or 5% of the total floor area. So, in all likelihood, it'll be a proportional kind of bringing into compliance. If they expand to that extent, then there will be some of the requirements that can be met reasonably and some that maybe are a lot harder and wouldn't come into play or wouldn't be impacted. So it's, you know, it's a gradual, over time kind of thing. And related to that, the master plan is looking 5, 10, 15, 20 years into the future. So we look at conforming to the master plan on an incremental basis. So if you decide not to rezone that way now, it doesn't mean that it's not appropriate at some time in the future. It doesn't mean you don't revisit the master plan and recommend a change or something else happens. It's a lot to think about.
Right, and certainly the owner could say, I want to
Sure.
become the Whitmore Lake North Village, or, you know, or something else. And then we look at it. I have one comment about parking. When we were doing the Whitmore Lake districts and the parking, and we didn't require the parking associated with that, there was a lot of discussion about needing to provide parking and potentially having some sort of a fee when something was built, so that those fees could contribute toward a municipal parking lot, for instance. We had some discussion like that. We didn't go anywhere with it, but you know, potentially there could be an issue like that where we have large numbers of people coming into the downtown, for instance, for you know, an assembly of any sort, and we may need to look into the future for parking down there, or maybe not. So it's I'm just bringing it up because we did discuss it as a planning commission some time ago.
Anybody else have any comments or questions? No? Okay, so as I'm looking at this, we still need to answer the question, should churches be permitted in the general commercial zoning district? So I think that should be our first project before we, I think the first thing we need to work on would be the first question, should churches be permitted uses in the general commercial zoning district? So that would be our first decision. Yep, and do we want to, go ahead, Mr. Roman?
I think I can help us move along. I'd like to make a motion that the planning, that the Planning Commission review all current zoning districts for compliance with the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, otherwise known as RLUPA, and make any compliance determinations and adjustments. I think that should be the first order of business.
I'll second that motion.
Mr. Roman motion, Ms. Chalkley supported. Any questions? Any comments? So we want to do this before we consider churches in the general commercial district? Yes, sir. Mr. Roman?
I think we should not just look at general commercial. I think we should look at all the ones that are specified on page 2, that there seems to be a need for us to re-look at.
Okay.
Look at again, and also look at ES, because I don't think there's any assembly uses in that one, just to make sure. But I mean, I think we should revisit LC, HC, GC, RTM, ES, and PSC zoning
Okay.
districts.
All right, so we have a motion on the table. All in favor? Or do you want a roll call vote?
Whatever you like.
Roll call vote. Mr. Roman?
Yes.
Mr. Kuzno? Yes. Ms. Chalkley?
Yes.
Ms. Chick? Yes. Motion passes. And, Mr. Iaquinto abstains and Mr. Dignan abstains.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Of course, that would be after our planning consultant does
Oh, yes.
a thorough review and presentation. I mean, it may not be next meeting, obviously, but in the
Thank you.
future of her convenience.
Yes.
Thank you.
Right. And if
Ms.
those changes are going to be made, it'll have to be posted, and we'll have to have a public hearing and the whole 9 yards that we need to do. I don't think, one of these districts doesn't exist anymore, either the residential office or the enterprise service, and we combined them somehow one meeting not that long ago and got rid of one of them. So I'm thinking we have one or the other, but not both these days.
We got rid of the RO, right?
I thought we got rid of-
Yes,
I thought we
that's
got
what
rid
it's
of
all
RO.
enterprise
Too.
district, yep.
Yeah.
I specifically was going off the, what's currently on the website, so
Mm-hmm.
whether it be updated or not, I don't know. But obviously, we'd want to update the ones that are not there if they are there,
Right.
I would think.
So are we comfortable with any information or discussion that we've gotten so far tonight to make a consideration on whether or not churches should be allowed in the general commercial district? Or do you want to do the,
I would like more information.
Okay.
I mean, it's very clear cut to me. I mean, it's either it belongs or it doesn't.
Right.
If there's other assembly uses, then it has to belong. There's no choice.
okay,
But the thing is, I think we need to look at some of the zoning districts that we have, and possibly some assembly uses don't fit there, in which case, along with that, places of worship may not belong there either. And staying with the act is what, I'm strictly looking at following the act so that there's no future problems. And I think it's going to resolve itself as far as that. But I mean, it's really a pretty clear-cut thing.
okay.
But I mean, we would have to discuss, and I would hope it would involve the whole commission. I'm not sure in this case, but whether or not as a group we think some of those assembly uses belong in all those districts.
Correct.
And I'm not so sure that they do.
So, Ms. Hodges, do you have direction to give us some more information on? Okay.
I believe
great.
so, yes.
Thank you.
Just, my initial thought is one thing that would help the discussion is to clarify the table and identify the manner in which each of these uses is permitted, whether it's by condition, some of them are by right, and then you can easily almost check a box and say, this is where it should go and how it should be treated. So, be happy to.
I did have another question.
Madam Chair?
Mr. Roman?
And I don't mean to deter, talking further about the GC to Whitmore Lake District. I'd like to hear more comment, really. I mean, so far I've been spewing what I thought, but, I'd like to hear more.
And doing a wonderful job, thank you. So would any other commissioners like to comment on the churches being allowed in the general commercial district? Nope. I will make a comment. I have no problem with it. Okay. I think it's a good idea. Mr. Fink?
Yeah, the only comment that I would make, just to follow up on a little bit of what Larry said, was, not only looking at the districts that have no's that allow for assembly uses, but also the districts that allow churches and assembly uses, and just determine whether or not they are appropriate. Just sort of a full review of assembly and churches. The one that sticks out to me is assembly uses and churches allowed in the agricultural districts. And that may be something that deserves some review as well. Right now it is allowed.
Right.
And the question is that appropriate? So.
Yeah.
Right. There are some that are obviously existing. There's no question.
So, Ms. Hodges, also, there was, Ms. Chalkley brought up a question, actually, was something that I thought of as well, is what considerations would the Living Waters have to investigate for it to find the project doable? I mean, what kind of changes would they have to do, or what kind of issues would they have to comply with for that area?
Is that something that the commission would like me to look into? Or?
Oh, she's,
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay, so
Yeah.
no, all right. And then, that was all I had.
Okay, moving on to new business, which we have none. Next item on the agenda is minutes from February 3rd. Minutes were distributed. Does anyone have any questions, corrections, updates, anything? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes as
So moved.
presented.
Oh, I'm sorry, were you making that motion?
I did make the
Okay,
motion.
I second it then.
Dignan motions, Iquento supports. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next item is policy review and discussion, goals and objectives for 2016. I did distribute a document to you of my thoughts and a copy of the goals and objectives from last year. If anyone in the audience would like a copy of what I distributed to them, I do have copies here. They are available for you. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Shockley.
I kind of like
Or,
what we
I'm
did.
sorry, Miss
I'm Janet,
Chick.
yeah.
Sorry.
I kind of like what we did last year, where everybody kind of put forth those things that they were interested in, and then we kind of rated them and see what was important to everybody. If you want to, do we want to try that again as a suggestion?
Okay. One of the thoughts I also had was not having such a lengthy list. Let's break it down and try to do quarterly goals and try to establish the goals and objectives for one quarter. And if we can get to those goals and objectives, great. If there's one that carries over, carry it over, and then figure it out. But very much smaller scope goals and objectives was my thought. And that as I said, we can certainly make a list. I think if we go and look at the 2015 rankings that were there, there's a few of these we can mark off the list, I believe, or we're very close to marking off the list. The one thing I think is important is we're not in a process of reviewing our master plan. So, is that correct? I believe it is. Ms. Chalkley.
Well, last year it was a real hot topic,
Yes,
and
it was.
that's why it ranks so high. And
Mhm.
since we have had a kind of a, I wouldn't say fizzling, but I mean a reduction in that pressure, that isn't as a big a concern as it was at that time. So,
I agree.
yeah.
So if we take a look at the other items that are on this list, and we can add items, yes, Mr. Iquento.
So you're stating to look at items that are priority for the first quarter, is that correct?
Well, that was my idea. I mean, the
And
board can
I'm
do
in
what the board
agreement
wants to do.
With that, I have one question.
Yes.
The survey, I don't see that on here, and the time frame that was established for the 1 year goes from when to when?
I'm going to have to ask staff. Do you know when, or maybe Ms. Chalkley knows?
I do. It goes until July. Cobalt was working on that, and so we have until July to complete that, although
To complete just getting the survey out, or the
Well,
whole process?
it was the whole process, if I'm not mistaken. I do have a draft back from Cobalt that I received after meeting with several community groups and directing them to put another version together. It's a very comprehensive survey, and part of it is based on National Communities Inventory Study, I think, or survey. So anyway, it's the full gamut of questions that a governmental body may want to survey their citizens about, and so it's really it can sit on the shelf, but it's available for some day, and it doesn't, we don't have to complete it, although the only reason I really pushed on this was because the township has already paid $8,000. We might as well get something for our $8,000, and I thought that a survey that would have multiple uses into the future would be of value, and so that's why I have what I have currently. I know the Planning Commission has not seen this yet. Very few people have seen this survey, and that's something that I would like us to actually take a look at as a commission and decide how we want to approach that.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Chalkley. Mr. Iaquinto?
In follow-up to my statement then, because, again, we are approaching the 3rd month of this calendar year, July being the 7th month, I believe that that should be a very high priority because, A, of the funds that have been allocated already and the commitment by the township board to get that accomplished at our recommendation originally. So I do believe that that would be on high priority for my agenda items and goals for the Planning Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Iaquinto. Ms. Chick?
Ms. Chalkley, the survey that you have, you said was a national survey, but is it a survey from Cobalt, or is this another survey you're talking about?
I pulled together a whole lot of information that I then gave them and said, here, put this into a form that we could get some valuable data from. It's not specifically all of those questions from that survey, but it has a lot of the same background as the things we were looking for.
So this is a Cobalt drafted survey?
It is a
Okay.
Cobalt drafted
Yeah.
survey.
So
Right.
can we see that at the next meeting? That would be awesome.
Sure.
Great.
What about, again, a presentation from Cobalt presenting that? So not just looking at it, but for time's sake, that they come, present it,
Explain.
to explain it, to then field questions so that we could see if that's the direction that we recommend going. And I personally would recommend a point person from our body, and that would be to me, it'd be wise that it's staff individual, and I would recommend Mr. Fink or Mary, because to me that's an appropriate point person to deal with Cobalt.
Thank you, Mr. Iaquinto. Ms. Chalkley? Anything? or-
I could see inviting them in to give a presentation on what they've produced.
Yeah.
That would be fine.
if-
And it wasn't, well, I don't want to speak for Mr. Fink, but it was something that I felt anyway that he didn't want to deal with and he wanted us to deal with. So that's why I mostly dealt with Cobalt
Well,
myself.
I do believe the last action,
I
I was
Mr.
the
Fink?
point person, yes.
I wouldn't exactly put it that way,
Okay.
unfortunately,
How would you like to
Marlene.
put it?
Nobody asked me to be involved with it, nor the board, nor the planning commission. And, it was a highly political, controversial item. This planning commission didn't ask me, the board of trustees didn't ask me, and Marlene, and I'm not saying this in a negative sense, it's just fact, Marlene took it upon herself to lead the effort. That's just the fact. I have not been, I've not been involved in the process, contrary to what some people have said and believed. That's just a reality of it. And I'm happy to be involved from an administrative perspective if the Planning Commission wishes. I'm not sure that I'm comfortable advising on questions and advising on content because I'm not sure that I'm clear as to what the survey is, what it's about, and the issues that it's addressing and the questions that it's posing. So because I don't have those answers as a staff person, all I can do is administer or ensure Mary and I could collectively, I mean, it's really just very simple, make sure Cobalt comes to the meeting, make sure you all have a copy of the survey. That's all I can do. I can't start drafting questions and providing input to Cobalt because I don't see clear consensus on the Planning Commission and I don't see clear consensus at the Board of Trustees level.
I understand. Thank you, Mr. Fink.
Sorry, I
No.
apologize for the diatribe.
Thank you, Mr. Fink. I do want to say one thing on this. The last action I remember this board taking in regards to the survey was to remove all of us from the survey, remove the political aspects of the survey, direct Cobalt to follow their process in establishing a survey and come back to us and present it to us. That was the last formal action taken by this board. Now, why Cobalt has not done that, I don't know, but we were not supposed to be involved in their initial assessment and bringing it to the table, a recommendation from them as to what to survey. That was supposed to be the direction. Ms. Chalkley.
Okay. At some point, there was a presentation to the Board of Trustees, and at the trustees meeting, there was a letter provided from Cobalt, what their preferred method was. And they provided a letter, and I believe you have all seen this letter also, that they wanted to speak to someone. They needed one voice to kind of work with to go through this. And so I was the one voice that worked with them to get it to a point where they could bring it to us. We are now at that point where they can bring it to us.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Ms. Chick.
So multiple
Ms.
people
Chick?
had provided, I'm sorry, multiple people had provided questions or comments that they wanted to see in part of the survey, and then they were supposed to run with it and send us something back. So that's what we're waiting for, is something back from them.
Right. And we now have it.
Okay. Let's,
Okay.
Mary, can we make sure that's on the agenda for the next meeting?
Okay.
All right, we'll put, yes.
Mr. Chair,
Mr.
if
Fink.
I may.
Mr. Fink.
Are you asking myself to ensure that Cobalt is here at the next meeting?
I don't know that we necessarily need them here yet.
Okay. Just that the
I think Ms. Chalkley has a copy of a survey that none of us have seen yet.
But if we,
But we could request them there if possible.
I'll make a motion that we have Cobalt at our next meeting presenting the survey that they have prepared for us thus far.
Support.
Mr. Iquendo has made a motion. Ms. Chick has supported. Discussion on the motion. I have a question for Mr. Fink. Is it possible, do you believe, for them to be here at our next meeting?
I don't know, and I have no issues with the motion. I'd like to make a review of the contract so that I understand the financial structure of what we're doing, and if I may ask the commission permission, I can make a review of that contract tomorrow and provide an update to the Board of Trustees. While it's not a voting meeting, I can provide an update to the Board of Trustees at the workshop and just give them a heads up that you guys are planning on moving forward with them at the next meeting. And Ken, you and I can be in communication if for some reason the contract or the financial issues preclude them from being here.
Okay.
Okay.
Is that fair?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So with that motion made by Mr. Iquento, we would need it conditioned on Mr. Fink reviewing the contract and finding that it's amenable to them coming at the next meeting.
If they can't make it for their scheduling purposes, that's fine, but then I believe my motion should still stand as is.
Okay. Anyone got comments?
Can you repeat the motion?
That Cobalt Research be present at the Commission's next meeting and present the survey they have prepared thus far.
Okay. Any more comments? Yes, Ms. Chalkley.
When you all get the survey to take a look at it, we've had some really contentious meetings about this, but I'd like you to think about this as like open-minded. It is broader. It's definitely broader than just do we have more development in the ag area, but it's really trying to gauge the feeling of the community toward their township and what they want to see and how they want to fund it. And so it's pretty it's pretty broad. So kind of please look at it with an open mind and come with constructive assistance for getting this project done. And I would like to say that while we have a master plan and we have agreement that the master plan is valid, we don't have to have this survey sent out next week, next month, or even next year. And it's really a decision then, I would think, of the Board of Trustees on whether they want to go ahead with the survey. And I would also discuss with Cobalt what would be the possibility of delaying the actual completion of it for another year or two, and would they do that for the same cost? You know, so not have the deadline be July. As just a point of information for us as we're talking about it.
Thank you, Ms. Chalkley. So with that, I guess I have a question for staff. Would it be appropriate for us to make a formal request for Cobalt to consider what would be necessary in order to extend the contract out farther than July?
Can we do that once we look at the survey with them present here and discuss all that with them? Yeah. I mean,
I think
that's
we
an
can.
appropriate time.
Okay, all right,
Either.
all right,
Okay.
great. So coming back to our goals and objectives, I think we just
We have
set-
a motion on the table, sir.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't call the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Oh,
Aye.
do we need to restate the motion? Okay, the motion was to have Cobalt come to our next regularly scheduled meeting and present the findings of the current survey that they have. So far.
Correct.
Okay? All right. Are we ready? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Sorry about the confusion there. So back to our goals and objectives. So I think we've just set one of our goals, possibly. What I was thinking is, and like I said, I just provided to you some of my goals that I thought we might have. One of those is a carryover of the sewer study, which we're still waiting on a couple items for that we should have in the next 30 to 90 days. You know, what I would like us to do is eventually, or at any time, at some point entertain a motion to ask our planner and staff to review all of our business-oriented zonings and provide for us whether or not, you know, recommendations on changes that might need to be made to make those zonings more relevant to our community. You know, are our current business-oriented zonings appropriate for what we are and who we are and where we are? You know, as we've established those zonings, that's my thought there. On streamlining the CUP site plan process, I know most of that is an administrative process, but we do have some things in our ordinance. I'd like us to eventually look at asking the planner and staff to bring forth recommendations to us to changes in that allow that process to be combined. And then one of the things that I like is I'd like to have a township trail plan with the Parks and Rec. And one of the things I mentioned about the Parks and Rec master plan is I'd love to see where trailheads are at surrounding townships, so that if we do have an opportunity for a trail, we could, and public land zoning. I'd like to ask that all of you please share your thoughts to add to this list. Email them to me, that kind of thing. We'll put a list together that's inclusive of all your thoughts and bring it to the next meeting where we actually rank them, if you'd like. So, and then a couple of objectives down there. I was trying to be, trying to understand, can we explore, other rebounded communities that are lake towns and how they've redeveloped and how they're doing today? And that's something I know I've had some discussions with our planner that they might be able to help us with. Other small lake communities like ours. And can we develop a greater understanding of what does a successful, vibrant, small town community with a successful rural preservation plan look like? And the third item I had on here is develop a greater understanding of the viability of PDR and TDR programs in Northfield Township. Are they economically viable? Would a program like that work? And I understand that is something that McKenna could potentially help us with understanding. So, Ms. Chalkley.
Yeah, I had been thinking for some time that it might be valuable to have an agricultural survey done of the township to see what actual economic impact there is of agriculture in the township. So I know we've got a lot of horse farms, and we've got fields of corn and soybeans depending on the year, and you know, there are some animals being raised out there. What is the economic impact really of our agricultural community, and how that affects the township? So I think that would be a good thing to do, and we may have some volunteers that would help with that agricultural survey.
Excellent. Yeah, and we don't have to do this by quarter, but I just think that having things that we can look at accomplishing in the next 3 to 4 months is important, because then we're being efficient with our time. And you know, so if there's things you think of that should be up here, please, like I said, not asking for you to put it all out there today. If you get those to me, I don't mind assembling a document that we can review and prioritize at our next meeting. Some things by nature are at the top of the list, obviously. Sewer capacity study, because it's already in process. Survey, it's already in process. Those kind of things. But, you know, I would like feedback on what your guys' thoughts are as far as establishing short-term goals and then having broad objectives that we can look at and adopt as our objectives for each quarter. I mean, is that something that you guys like, are open to? Do you want to just scrap that and go back to the original stuff that we were doing? I mean, I'm okay either. I'm just trying to present some of my creative ideas.
Also,
Sorry, Quinto.
this is another item that we have discussed, but we haven't really addressed, which is the impact of 2.5 acre zoning in the ag in some areas. It's been something that we have tossed around, that we have mentioned. I think it's important to have a full discussion of that with input from our planner, so that maybe there are some proper areas of the ag, depending on where they are located. Because again, as we have seen, there are several of our surrounding townships that have 2.5 and 1 acre zoning in their ag districts. So I think that's something appropriate that we should address too.
I will make sure that is on our list. Anything else? Ms. Chick.
I think this is a good start, but I think that anytime anybody wants to bring anything to the table to discuss it, they should feel free to do that. And if they want it on the agenda to provide any kind of background information or add as a discussion, as long as it's on the agenda when we come to the meeting.
I'd love to see that. Anything else? On this same note, actually I'll cover it under commissioner comments. So with nothing else under goals and objectives, the next item is call to the public. If anyone would like to speak to the commission. Yes, Ms. Wheeler. If you could state your name and address for the record, please. I do apologize.
Faith Wheeler, 371 Grove on Horseshoe Lake. I had a question in listening to what was being said concerning Living Waters Church in the area where the saddlery is and the bow and arrow place. I would think right now it's probably grandfathered, but I'm wondering if you change districts of two things. First, the railroad, and I'm thinking about the horrible accident that they had where the train went through carrying very hazardous materials, and they hit a bar. They were going too fast, and they've lost 40-some people in that area. And it was in Canada. but close to us. And since then, I know that they've been doing a lot of research on what we're hauling on our railroads. And a lot of it is going through and not being disclosed to the townships of what they're hauling through. And a lot of them are the oil tankers, the big round oil tankers. There was a radio program on the other night that I was coming home and just happened to be listening to, and they went out and they counted. And they had asked before, you have anything going through this particular town, small town? And they said no, and they counted 500 cars. So there's a lot of political going on about that, and I'm wondering, since our railroad goes through in that area, is there any regulation to how close things can be built or not built, is the same as we're talking about the other. And the other thing is that FEMA came through a couple years ago now and redid our district, and Horseshoe Lake Drain runs through there. And I would be pretty sure that it is considered a floodplain. So if you rechange something, I don't know how that may address or not address what you may want to build there. So those are kind of two things that I would think you might want to look at. And I don't think that the flooding problem is really going to change until Livingston County changes the way that they run theirs, because ours is a county drain going out, but when it hits Livingston County, it is not a county drain. So there's some problems in that area. Those are the only two thoughts I had. The railroad and what it could impact on the whole, really on the whole town of Whitmore Lake.
Certainly.
And these flooding issues.
Thank you, Ms. Wheeler. I appreciate you bringing things to our attention, and I know our planner will note that as well, and if it's necessary, bring it up to us. Mr. Warburton, welcome.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Craig Warburton, 450 West Joy Road. I have letters in your packet that I felt very strongly about. I was really glad to see that the packet this week didn't have the bylaws in it. It's obvious that when the bylaws do come back, there's not going to be a public hearing. And I would like to just take a moment to urge you to give really strong consideration to not lowering the number of affirmative votes to change the master plan below 6. And for this not to be the planning commission that decided to lower the bar and lower the degree of consensus on something that is so urgently protective of so many lives in this township. I'm excited to hear Cobalt coming back to the table, because those meetings were contentious, and I can pretty well assure you there will be again. So we know why we're doing that survey. It's about Section 3. It's about 480 acres that happens to be zoned, or that happens to be zoned agricultural, lie in Northfield Township, but belong to Ann Arbor Public Schools, which makes it very, very, very marketable. It's interesting that the land immediately across the street has had its development rights purchased, and it's 400 of the most beautiful farm acres you could really see for a long, long time, or a long distance in this area of Michigan. It's just beautiful. The other thing I wanted to mention was that the minutes you approved didn't include any comment or any mention of Mr. Stanilenko's tirade at the end of the meeting and the comments from the commissioners. And while you can take pot shots at trustees when you take on that job, you suppose you have to carry a shield for that, but Mr. Nelson has opinions and a right to them, and it was totally inappropriate for that to be dragged out in the meeting. The room is not exactly busting with people. I looked today, and the meeting that he taped from last time got played 30 times. So you could, maybe 30 more people saw what took place, but I carbon copied everybody with my emails, except for one. And then I got a carbon copy response, and I had to choke on that one. That was really a well-played card. But I got one really contentious email that questioned my honesty, it questioned my character. It was a personal shot that made me step back.
30 seconds.
It was totally inappropriate. I find a lot of the commentary that takes place when it's directed to individuals in the township is sophomoric and childlike. We're entitled to opinions. You guys put yourselves in front of the public. We want to protect our homes. We want to protect our land. When we hear words like protected development rights or traded development rights and surveys that are so concocted that they have to be put on the shelf, it really scares us. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Warburton. Anyone else from the public? Seeing no one else, we'll move on. Next item is comments from the commissioners. Start with the left side of the table. Mr. Roman?
I'd just like to welcome Ms. Hodges and thank her for her efforts tonight. Thank you.
Mr. Kuzno? Ms. Chockley?
I just want to bring up the fact that we have gotten this opportunity from the Michigan Association of Planning, if anyone wants to get a refresher in planning and zoning. I'm going to go to the ZBA one, finding that I've not done ZBA before, so I feel I can use some training there. So I'll be going to that on March 3rd, and it's in Belleville, so it's close. So if anyone feels the need for training or would like a refresher, it's available, and I'm going.
Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Chockley. Mr. Iquento?
Yes, I would, several items. First, the Michigan Pond Hockey Sports Charity Classic regrets that they did have to cancel for this weekend, which is the 19th, 20th, and 21st for the pond hockey tournament on Whitmore Lake due to the unsafe ice conditions and the impending weather that is in front of us. So regrettably, that event has been canceled for this weekend. Secondly, I would like to thank Ms. Hodges as well. I felt that she was very thorough, very precise, and very easy to listen to in the way that she explained herself through the process today. So thank you very much. Thirdly, I would like to address something that has been very disheartening, that it was been brought to my attention by several people who attended a event of the chamber function on the 28th of January, that there was a rumor that was stated there and started and is carried forward, and I'm appealing to the dignity of the general public that I do put myself out as a person that's involved in our community, but the rumor was that my wife and I are separated and I no longer live in this township. Again, if someone wants to address something to myself, I have broad shoulders and I will gladly accept those issues if they're directed at me. But the minute they involve my children and my wife, I would really ask for that to cease and desist and stop. I have been happily married for 21 years. I have been a resident of this township, and I reside in this township since June of 1993. My residency is at 9876 Main Street, Whitmore Lake, Michigan, and I have been a very active member of the community and a happily resident of Northfield Township. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Iquento. Ms. Chick?
I have nothing tonight, but I'll welcome Ms. Hodges. Yeah. Good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have a couple things, Ms. Hodges. I would like to welcome you. Thank you for being here. We look forward to working with you for a long, long time. So, there's two things. One in particular is some clarity on how things make it to us as a planning commission. And Mary and Howard may be able to provide some insight on this. We've had things, I can start with the beginning of last year when we did have the Biltmore project come to us. It was a letter, it was a request that we never formally responded to, that we're going to have to formally respond to. But also, how do things make it to us? When we get a request from someone to do something, we are under a certain obligation to do something on that. And we had one tonight. I mean, the church requested us to do something, and we owe them a response. So, Mr. Fink, can you kind of explain to us, there seems to be an informal and a formal process, am I
Sure.
correct?
Yes.
Okay. Do we have to address informal processes or informal requests, or?
So, so I want to start. Can I make a comment?
Absolutely.
There were a number of comments. I don't remember if they were at the last meeting or the meeting before, about some real concern on the part of some residents as to how the Living Water Church came to this body. I can tell you that there was no influence whatsoever with respect to how that request came forward. And frankly, any request that comes forward to, and they will come through my office. They may come to the counter, or Mary may, take it, or Dawn at the counter. Ultimately, I am made aware of and do ensure that the process is followed, and I get involved in the process from an administrative perspective up front. That's just the reality of having a manager in the office, and it's sort of the reality of how planning commissions generally operate all across America. It's just the way it works. Things come into the office, they get filed, and they get funneled through a process, and that process crosses my desk on almost everything. There are some exceptions where I don't really get involved in some minor issues that come in front of the ZBA or even sometimes various permits or planning commission. Whether it's an informal process or a formal process, those informations are going to be transferred to the planning commission when it's appropriate. For example, we are working with a light industrial company. We are hoping that they end up locating in Northfield Township off of North Territorial. And we've been working with that company for 5 or 6 months, if not longer. When that process comes forward and there's actually an application that is presented, then that will come in front of the Planning Commission. If there's an informal process, like what happened in the case of Living Water Church, and they requested to me directly for something to be reviewed, that'll be immediately provided to the Planning Commission, either via an email or via through some channel. There is, it's just, that's the way it works. Is that kind of what you were addressing, or did you want me to address something else in particular?
Well, no, I mean, that's down the line of what I'm addressing. The question I have, though, is and this comes from a legal question as well as a real question is,
right.
I'll go back to Biltmore.
Right.
And
Yep.
we got a request. We never responded to that request after a formal review from our planner, and we are going to have to do that at some point on an agenda in the future.
So let me address that. I apologize.
Well, and Living Water has come and done the same kind of thing.
That's right.
And what I want to do is understand in the future when Company A, Acme Incorporated, comes and says, "We're thinking about doing this. Can the Planning Commission consider adding this to the such and such district?" Or rather, not could you, will you consider adding this to the such and such district? And they send that to us, and we take action on it, or we review it. When do we and don't we owe them a response?
So let me address this. I'm certainly not an attorney, and I would ask that Sally jump in if you think anything needs to be added, or I say something that's incorrect.
Please
Sally
do.
has more experience in this than I do. So what I would say is, again, I'm not an attorney and I'm not giving you legal advice, but there is a due process element of the Planning Commission. And whether we like it or not, frankly, the Planning Commission has to decide. All right? There does come a time through the planning process when ultimately planning has to end and decisions have to begin. And so when an applicant comes forward, and arguably, and this would be more of a legal question, Arguably, even Living Water Church has presented, in some ways, an application. They didn't formally fill out a document that we have in the office and so on and so forth, but they've created an expectation. They've created an expectation in their own way to say that they would like something looked at. Now, in that particular case, it's a little different because you're looking at changing a zoning classification and changing the ordinance. In the case of Biltmore, they actually requested a master plan amendment, and they made a formal request to that effect. You know, it was a long time ago, grant you, but they submitted a document requesting that. Now, I do want to point out that once that application comes forth, we as staff have an obligation to bring that forth. We cannot deny due process, pure and simple. Sort of irrespective of whether or not we as staff think that it is in conformance or not in conformance with the master plan, or conformance or not in conformance with zoning, that process has to be provided to an applicant. It's essentially due process. In this particular case with Biltmore, they have provided a formal application, and they do need to be acted upon legally. It's just an item that's out there. We did advertise an intent to plan. We did start an official planning process, and that planning process is still open and does need to be acted upon. Is that?
Okay.
Did I?
You did. You did. I guess
Sorry.
Ms. Hodges.
Sorry.
Yes. Go ahead, Mr. Fink.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. Here's where I'm at, and my fellow commissioners can weigh in on this. In the future, when something comes through like that, this is the process I'm thinking in my head would happen, is that would be forwarded after staff review and discussion to Ms. Hodges. And when that comes to us, and before it comes to us, Ms. Hodges is going to look at it, and Ms. Hodges is going to tell us, in the context of our current ordinances and rules, where that request would stand. If it's a zoning request, is it compliant? If it's, I'm not asking you for a decision. I'm asking you for context as to where it fits within our current zoning ordinances. That's where I would think it would come, and then that person could be here, Ms. Hodges would be here, and we could then have a discussion about that with the advice of our planner in front of us. Am I missing an element there, or am I missing something?
I'm a little unclear about where you're going with it. To me, it depends on, there are different kinds of questions, different kinds of applications that might come in and be referred. So a request, if it's a request like, is this use permitted in this district, that's one kind of thing. I can say yes or no and make that recommendation, and you can discuss actions and so on. If it's a request to amend the master plan, I can say, yeah, you can either do it or not, or it needs to be evaluated and a report needs to be made and so on. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
I understand, and I don't want to put you in a box there. Yes, Ms. Chalkley, please.
When an applicant came and had a question like that, in the past, this is my understanding, and I believe it worked this way. When an applicant came and had a question about whether their property was appropriate for one thing or another, they would have a pre-application meeting, or at least some consult with the planner. The planner would kind of give them direction about yes or no or whatever. And I don't believe we saw any of that until it was moving along to the next step. And we had a process, I thought, set up for that. And so we wouldn't see it until it was, they decided they wanted a rezoning, and we saw that with Little Red properties or some, they wanted a rezoning. Correct. And then we saw it all. We didn't get it ahead of time before it was all ready, and we've even made comments as a body that, don't give us stuff before it's all ready, because then we're delaying the applicant again and making them come back. So So there was this pre-application meeting, and it kind of moved down its track with the planner until it was ready. Now, we would get, when there was a planning consultant report, I would ask regularly Mr. Luan to tell us, is there anything going on there that we may be seeing in the next few months, just for a heads up? And then he would say yes or no, or, you know, give us kind of the gist of it, and that's where it was at. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but that's the way it used to be.
Okay.
So I'm wondering
Yes,
if
Ms.
Ms.
Chair.
Hodge has a copy of the streamlining process, the manual that we put together. I don't know that
She
she does.
should have the
Okay.
site plan review
I
manual.
have the site plan review manual, it's online, and I think there's a rezoning, you have a couple of manuals.
It's a
that are
flow
on-
chart system. Did
And
you
flow
see that
chart.
one?
Mhm.
I have it, I haven't,
Okay.
I can't remember if I saw the flow.
The flow chart.
Mr. Kuzno?
Study.
And then Mr. Iquento.
Regarding the question of amending the master plan, do we have a written procedure for that? Or is it just anybody can write a letter saying, would you please amend the master plan? Do we have to have any kind of proof of ownership or proof of option, you know, potential ownership? And if we don't, why not? And if or should we?
Thank you, Mr. Kuzno. Mr. Payne?
So all of those things would be considered in an application, and in the case of the master plan for Biltmore, the Planning Commission actually voted to review the master plan. So that decision at this body was already made, and that's why you've sort of entered that formal process and need to complete that formal process. In general terms, any kind of review for a master plan that would come forward would have to have those level of details, because what's going to happen is, here's what's going to happen realistically speaking. If, let's say, somebody comes in and wants a review of the master plan, they're going to have to present documentation to staff and to Sally in order for Sally to provide a recommendation whether or not the Planning Commission should actually entertain the review of that master plan in the first place. Okay, and now I'm not speaking for, I don't want to speak for Sally. I mean, I don't presume to know all of her processes and what what her kind of feeling is of best practices. But ultimately, Sally, as your consultant, is going to make a recommendation, and she can't make that recommendation and create that staff report without that information. She can't do it. And so, Sally may say, well, there's a review come forward of a master plan, but they don't have enough specificity and detail, and so, she may say, I recommend not to review it at this time because it may not be relevant or appropriate in the level of detail that they've provided. Did I?
That's fair.
Is that fair?
Okay.
Mr. Cousineau, did I answer your question?
Well, so you're telling me that, so it's up to the consultants, whatever her method for reviewing it is, not ours as a township. That doesn't seem right.
Well,
Am I missing something here?
Well,
If I'm an applicant, I want to know what I need to do to make this happen. And if it's just me kind of like guessing what you're going to require of me, or at least maybe have a pre-meeting, okay, that's fine, but it seems like the township should have some sort of procedural requirements for that.
we do. We have lots of procedural requirements. We have very specific procedural requirements when you're submitting a rezoning, when you're submitting a site plan request, when you're submitting all kinds of things. But yes, sir.
Mr. Fink, but what about when you're requesting something unusual, like
Right.
change your ordinance, or like, those kind of things. What I want is to know that those kind of things aren't going to make it to us without the eye and comments from our planner.
Right.
Or from staff,
Right.
or both. Those are the things that are critical. Mr. Iquento, and then over to Mr. Roman.
In respect to Biltmore, because that was mentioned, I recall at a meeting in the past that you made a motion to notify them that we were following our master plan at this point. So to me, and a letter be submitted to them to that effect, so to me that closed it out, didn't it?
That was my understanding at the time. It's been clarified to me that that is not the case, and we
Okay.
do, at some point, need to bring that back up. We need to ask our planner to formally review the request and how it complies with our master plan, give us a recommendation, and at that point in time, this board needs to take action on the recommendation from the planner.
And
Is that correct, Mr. Fink?
That is absolutely 100% correct. So, the Planning Commission does need to take formal action. I'll state it. Again, I'm not your attorney, but I'll do my best. The Planning Commission has to take formal action on either the denial, the approval, the denial in part, the approval in part, one of the four. Not suggesting any one of those should be or shouldn't be, but the Planning Commission has to take formal action on that motion. In order for the Planning Commission to take formal action, it would be advisable, strongly advisable, that you ask, as Mr. Dignan has indicated, that your planning consultant provide you a analysis and their recommendation if whatever action they feel is appropriate and recommended. In addition to the planning consultant, I would also suggest in this particular case that you look towards the advice as well from your engineering consultants. And so in this case, you would ask for some kind of related information to sewer capacity type issues. Those would be, in this particular case, I think the two primary consultants that you would lean on. Anytime you would look to any of these kind of requests, you would look to your planning consultant and your experts, and in many cases, in many communities, staff does it. They provide the staff report. That's why it's called the staff report. But in this case, we have an expert planner, and so you would ask the planner and the engineer to provide that guidance to you. In the case of living water, for example, at some point you would ask Sally to provide a written report to you to provide guidance in how she thinks you would proceed, and then ultimately you debate her analysis and make the decision accordingly.
Ms. Hodges, do you have anything to add to that or clarify, or are you okay where we're?
It's
Okay.
fine at this point.
Okay. Mr. Hunter, you had a follow-up?
Yeah, in that perspective then, I believe it's vitally important we address this very quickly, because I understood that process was already closed, but hearing that and understanding that, I would make that motion that Mr. Fink suggested regarding the Biltmore request of 2014.
Okay, okay, Mr. Iquento. Is that a motion? Or are we discussing still?
We're discussing.
Okay, all right. Okay, I understand.
I said I would recommend making a motion.
Okay, can I now go to Mr. Roman?
With all due respect, I think all this conversation belongs on next meeting,
Okay.
agenda, policy, review, and discussion. And I think, for myself, I would appreciate possibly an outline from Mr. Fink on everything he discussed, or the procedure, and I think it'd be very helpful for all of us to have that information beforehand. I don't think any of this should occur during comments from the commissioners.
Yeah, I didn't
Okay.
expect it to go there. Thank you, Mr. Roman. I concur as well. Mary, can we please make sure that we'll have two items, I guess, on the next agenda for that then. Under old business, we will have the Biltmore request, and then under policy review and discussion, we can talk a little bit more, maybe in our packets we can have a copy of that process, but I'd like to have a discussion more about those informal things and how they get to us, and if we could not. Yes, Mr. Roman.
Just one last thing. If you put them both on to the next agenda, you're going to get to the old business first, and the policy and review really needs to be discussed first prior to the agenda item that I think you're suggesting. Just my thought.
The reason I did that, and that was intentional, is whatever we change in policy and review is irrelevant. That request came in and has to be under the guidelines of what we did, not what we want to do in the future. The policy review and discussion is about what we want to do in the future, and we can't apply a standard to them today that didn't exist when they came forward. I believe so. That's the only reason I did that. Okay. All right. I'm sorry, you can't. I apologize. All right. Is there any other commissioner comments? Then I am all set. The announcement of the next regular meeting is March 2nd, 2016, and adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
Support.
Moved by Quinto, supported by Roman. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, folks.